The dream of homeownership is something we all chase. For my fiancé and me, that dream finally materialized in a quiet, sun-drenched suburb in Georgia. We were young, ambitious, and ready to start our lives. But we didn't know that our starter home came with a neighbor who would turn our sanctuary into a living hell. The American dream, that's what they call it. For my fiancé and me, it was a 2-story starter home in a quiet Georgia suburb. We spent our first 3 days surrounded by cardboard boxes and the smell of fresh paint. The neighborhood was perfect, or so it seemed. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden fingers across our new lawn. But as the shadows grew, I noticed the house to our left. It was a silent, gray structure that seemed to swallow the sunlight. The curtains were heavy, motionless slabs of fabric. While other neighbors were out watering plants or walking dogs, house number 42 remained a tomb. I remember standing on my porch, a cold beer in hand, feeling a sudden, inexplicable shiver. It wasn't the wind. It was the feeling of 1,000 needles pricking my skin. Someone was watching, not just looking, but studying me. It happened at 2:14 a.m. I woke up thirsty and headed to the kitchen. As I passed the living room window, a movement caught my eye. I froze. In the upstairs window of the gray house, a man was standing. He wasn't hidden behind the curtain anymore. He was pressed against the glass. The moonlight hit his face, revealing skin like crumpled parchment and eyes that were nothing but dark pits. He didn't move when he saw me. He didn't duck away. He just stared, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't a neighbor. This was a predator marking his territory. The next morning, I saw him again, a sliver of his face through the curtains as I mowed the lawn. Every time I turned the mower, he was there, a silent, hateful sentinel. The silence broke into open hostility. I started finding things. A dead squirrel on our welcome mat, cigarette butts in our flower beds. Then came the patrols. I woke up to a rhythmic crunching of gravel. I looked out the back door and saw him. He was standing in our backyard, holding a heavy, rusted iron pipe. The beam of my flashlight hit him, and he didn't even blink. "This is private property," I yelled, my voice trembling. He took a slow, deliberate step toward me. "I've lived here 30 years, he rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "I know who belongs and who doesn't. You are a stain." The racism was a physical blow. He stood there for 3 hours, just staring at our back door until the sun came up. We didn't sleep. We sat on the kitchen floor, clutching a steak knife, waiting for the wood to splinter. The final blow came on a Tuesday. We were sitting at the dining table trying to discuss moving out when the world exploded. A heavy brick tore through the window, sending a spray of glass into my fiancé's hair. Screams echoed in the small room. I ran to the window and saw him standing on the sidewalk, his arms crossed, a sickening smile on his face. He didn't run. He wanted us to see him. He wanted us to know that our walls were no protection. We called the police, but they said it was his word against ours since there were no cameras. That was the night we left. We packed what we could into the trunk and drove to a motel. We sold the house in a month, losing thousands of dollars, but saving our lives. Every time I pass a gray house now, I check the windows. I know he's still there, waiting for the next stain to move in. Daniel was the kind of neighbor you'd want in a commercial. He was tall, always smiling, and had a laugh that boomed through the hallway. He brought us a homemade apple pie the day we moved into the apartment complex. But his wife, Veronica, was the shadow to his light. She stood 3 steps behind him, her hands folded over her stomach, her eyes fixed on the floor. When I tried to talk to her, Daniel would answer for her. "She's shy," he'd say, his hand gripping her shoulder so hard his knuckles turned white. I noticed the bruises then, faint, yellowing marks around her wrists. I wanted to say something, but the perfect neighbor mask he wore was too thick to pierce. One Monday, the silence in their apartment became absolute. No footsteps, no muffled arguments. Veronica's car remained in the same spot for 3 days, collecting dust. When I asked Daniel, he looked frantic, his eyes darting. "She's with her mother. Cancer diagnosis. Very sudden," he stammered. But he didn't leave. Instead, he spent every night in the shared basement. I would hear the heavy metal door groan open at 2 a.m. Then came the smell. It wasn't just bleach. It was something metallic, something that made the back of my throat itch. I saw him dragging heavy plastic bags down the stairs, his shirt soaked in sweat, his breathing heavy and ragged. He looked like a man trying to bury a secret that kept clawing its way up. Couldn't help it. My curiosity was a fever. When Daniel went to the store, I slipped into the basement. It was freezing. The smell of bleach was overwhelming now. I walked toward the back, near the furnace, and stopped. A rhythmic scratching sound was coming from behind a newly plastered section of the wall. Scritch, 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 like a trapped animal. I leaned my ear against the cold concrete. "Daniel?" a voice whispered. It was Veronica, but it didn't sound like her. It sounded like a ghost. "He's coming back. Run." I felt my heart hammer against my ribs. I turned to leave and saw Daniel standing at the top of the stairs, the silhouette of a shovel in his hand. He wasn't smiling anymore. I didn't run. I scrambled into the shadows and called 911 from my pocket. The police arrived just as Daniel reached the bottom step. The scene that followed was a nightmare. They broke open the wall and found a crawl space, a tomb. Veronica was there, alive but barely a human anymore. Daniel sat on the floor, laughing a high-pitched, manic sound that I can still hear when the wind blows. As they led him away, he leaned toward me and whispered, "I have friends, neighbor, and they know where you sleep." I moved out that night. I left everything I owned. No furniture is worth the price of a man like Daniel knowing your address. In Queens, space is a luxury. My duplex was a relic from the 1940s. With walls so thin I could hear my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, turning the pages of his newspaper. He was a recluse, a man who never spoke. But the sounds he made were wrong. It wasn't just walking. It was a rhythmic, heavy dragging sound. Every night at 3 a.m. the tapping would begin. Tap, tap, tap. It was always right behind my headboard. I'd shift my pillow, and the tapping would move with me. It was as if he was tracing my outline through the wood and plaster. The tapping evolved into whispers. I'd be brushing my teeth, and a voice would drift through the vent. "Your hair looks soft today." I dropped my toothbrush. I lived alone. I checked the doors locked, the windows latched. I went to Mr. Henderson's door and pounded on it. No answer. Only the sound of something heavy being moved away from the door. That night, I slept with the lights on. I heard a scratching sound inside the wall. Not on the other side, but inside the cavity. It sounded like fingers fumbling with the wiring. "I can see you," the voice giggled. It wasn't Henderson. It was something else. The final night was a fever dream. I woke up to a sensation of cold air on my face. My closet door, which I had locked with a heavy chair, was wide open. The chair was tossed across the room. I reached for my phone, but it was gone. Then, from the darkness of the ceiling corner, a figure began to descend. It didn't use a ladder. It moved like an insect, limbs clicking and snapping. "You're late for our talk," it rasped. It was a man, skeletal and covered in wall insulation, his eyes wide and unblinking. I didn't scream. My throat had closed up. I bolted for the door, my feet barely touching the stairs. The police found a labyrinth. Behind Henderson's wardrobe was a tunnel that branched out into the crawl spaces of the entire building. Henderson had been dead for weeks. The neighbor was a squatter who had been living in the walls, watching us through pinholes he'd drilled in every room. He had a collection of my belongings. My hairbrush, a single earring, and dozens of candid photos he'd taken while I slept. They never caught him. He vanished into the subway system. Now, every time I hear a house creak or a pipe rattle, I don't think it's the building settling. I think it's him settling in for the night. Home is supposed to be the place where we feel the safest. But as these stories show, sometimes the greatest danger isn't hiding in the woods or in a dark alley. It's living right next door, separated only by a thin wall or a wooden fence. We never truly know who our neighbors are. The person who waves at you every morning might be the same person watching you through a pinhole at night. So, the next time you hear a strange tapping on your wall or feel eyes on your back while you're in your garden, don't ignore it. It might be a warning. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more spine-chilling content. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had a neighbor that made you feel unsafe? Stay safe and keep your doors locked. Good night.